unravel me with a melody, and you surround me with a song of deliverance of my enemies, till all my fears are gone. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. And I've been born again to your family. Your blood flows through my veins. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. No, I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. You drowned my fears in murder. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. You drowned my fears in her love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. I am a child of God.
Well, hey, I just wanted to welcome you all to Terranova. I got to tell you, that I really just love being able to sing together as a community, to be able to take some of the truths of God, and there's just a way that God works when we sing it that I think kind of drives a little bit deeper into our hearts. We've actually been talking a little bit about that this summer. It's a way that God, I think, encourages us, and then there's also the encouragement of being together, whether it's being together here in person or online. Is that we know that we're not walking alone in this life. We get to walk together, and that's the way God designed it to be. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later on in our time. So again, just wanted to say thanks for being here. If you're here with us in the room, you can go ahead and have a seat if you will. I'll tell you, one of the things that's been on my mind, also I just thought too, we'd just thank the band too for leading us. Yeah, and so here's the thing that's been on my mind a little bit as we move into August is that I really do love the summer months, and it's just for this real practical reason, we just have more daylight to do stuff with. And hopefully you've been out doing stuff, and there's probably a lot of different things that you've been doing with the extra time that you have. So I bet that we've got some people that are here that are like our growers. If you like gardening people, can you like make some noise if you like you grow stuff? Okay, we won't check what kind of stuff you grow, but you're growing stuff. So that's, in summer is like the time that you harvest that, which is fantastic. How many of you are nappers? Okay, so that's the thing that you're doing. Okay, we've got some nappers. Okay, yell real loud if you're a napper, or go, if you're a napper, we got that. So that's good. You can go ahead and do that. And then outside exercise people. Let's go ahead and hear from you, outside exercise people. Screaming and yelling. You were out there riding bikes and on surfboards and walking around, walking in the neighborhood, and that was fantastic. And how many of you are readers? You love to read a good book during the summer? Okay, readers, raise your hand, make some noise, reading people. Okay, super smart reader people, right? And it's great because the God on Film that we're going to be talking about tonight actually is based on a whole series of books. And maybe you've read some of them. They're real thick, but really enjoyable to read. So we're going to get to that in here just a little while. But what I want to do right now is to walk us through what it is that you got when you walked in here, or if you see it online, we call it the Connect card. So let's go ahead and check out the program that you got. The Connect card is on the back. I'm going to go ahead and tear it out like we always do. And what we'd love to do is that everybody fill out the Connect card, because we really love to hear from everybody. Whether it's your first time or your second time, you've been here multiple times, you can fill this thing out. We've got the paper copy that you can take a pen to. You've also got the Terra Nova app. The Connect card is on your app. Some of you like to use the app. If you're watching us online, you can go ahead and use the app, or you can go ahead and just work on that Connect card electronically, because, the thing that we're really passionate about here at Terra Nova is being this church that actually is really well connected relationally, and that we're together able to experience the warmth of being known. And so the Connect card actually really helps us in that quest. And so help us out by, filling out your name, and then on the back you can write a prayer request, and we've got a prayer team that will pray for that request. If you write that down, you might even write down what it is that you do during, that additional hours that you have during the summer. I'd love to know that. So take a little bit of time during the course of our time to work on this, and that'd be great. Now that you've got that going, in the program, you'll notice there's a bunch of different stuff that's here. We've got message notes that you're going to use, a giving envelope that you can use. Blue sheet is telling us a little bit about Terra Nova Tours. That's coming up next week. If you want to join the tour, still room for you. On the backside, tells you a little about our men's retreat. Still got sign-ups for that. Guys, you can sign up for that. And we'd love to have you. We've still got room for you on that. And then what I want to do is to spend a little bit of time, though, trying to answer a question that maybe you have had, and that is, hey, what's this church kind of all about, really? Maybe you're here and you're new, and you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, so what's going on with this place? And I guess that one of the ways that I would answer that is that what we're all about is the calling that God has for us as a community to make God's love famous in our area and really all around the world. So it's really this desire that we have to live other directed lives that go beyond the walls of the church and really pour in to people's lives in our community, in our world. And one of the ways that we do that is by teaming together, because we just love teaming together. So we don't just say, hey, should we really make God's love famous? Go and figure that out somehow. Is throughout the course of the year, just about every single month, is that we have an opportunity for anybody that wants to go and do something to get their hands dirty with love together. And we call these Incarnation All Plays. And here's the one that's going on in the month of August. We are doing what we call Serve Day at the Abbey. And here's the deal, is on that Saturday, on August 28th, is that we're going to get together at a 23-acre piece of property that's right by Cook's Corner, if you know where that's at, off El Toro Road. That's up there. And this is a property that the Orange County Rescue Mission is developing, and that they got this property in kind of an amazing way, and that they're working on getting this property ready to be able to open their doors to people that are in our community that are homeless and they're living outside. And so it's all part of a big master plan that they have of getting this property ready to be able to be used as a mighty force in our community to help solve the problem of homelessness, and that we get to play a small part in that by helping them get it ready. And so there'll be lots of different things that we can do on that day. We actually did this a couple months ago, and we found ourselves, pulling weeds and carrying around rocks and working on some of the buildings that are there. It's something that everybody can be a part of, and that includes kids. So if you've got kids, bring them to Serve Day. So what we would like you to do is to get involved with Serve Day by starting out using that Connect card. You can just write Serve Day on that Connect card, and then we'll be in contact with you and get you all registered and set up for the Serve Day. You can also use the Terra Nova app. Just go to the events button and click events. You'll find it there, and then you can also register online as well. And I'm really excited about being with a bunch of you, all of us together, getting a chance to do something that I think will make a powerful difference in our community at Serve Day. Well, again, just wanted to thank you so much for coming. Really excited that we're all getting a chance to share in together this series we've been doing. It's called God on Film. Here's part 4 coming at you. Here's the movie that we're going to be exploring this time.
You have only one choice. The ring must be destroyed.
What are we waiting for?
The ring cannot be destroyed, Gimli, son of Gloin, by any craft that we here possess. The ring was made in the fires of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade. It must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came. One of you must do this.
One does not simply walk into Mordor. Its black gates are guarded by more than just orcs. There is evil there that does not sleep. And the great eye is ever watchful. It is a barren wasteland, riddled with fire and ash and dust. The very air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly.
Have you heard nothing Lord Elrond has said? The ring must be destroyed.
And I suppose you think you're the one to do it.
And if we fail, what then? What happens when Sauron takes back what is his?
I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf. So much never trust an elf. Do you not understand?
I will take the ring to Mordor. Though I do not know the way.
I will help you bear this burden, Frodo Baggins, as long as it is yours to bear.
If by my life or death I can protect you, I will.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my axe.
Carry the fate of us all, little one. If this is indeed the will of the Council, then Gondor will see it done.
Mr. Frodo's not going anywhere without me.
No, indeed, it is hardly possible to separate you, even when he is summoned to a secret council, and you are not.
Oi! We're coming too! We'll have to send us all tied up in a sack to stop it.
Anyway, you need people of intelligence on this sort of mission. Quest. Thing.
Well, that rules you out, Pip.
9 companions. So be it. You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Right. Where are we going?
Well, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. It is summertime, and summertime around here is movie times. It is the 4th week of our series, God on Film Classics Edition. Movies that we love, stories that all draw us in. And this week we're talking about J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring, the first of his Lord of the Rings trilogy. The story, as you may know, is of a simple, unassuming hobbit named Frodo Baggins who inherits the One Ring from his cousin Bilbo Baggins, and it is a ring of evil power that was forged in the fires of Mordor by the Dark Lord Sauron, and in which his evil presence somehow is still bound. And when the wise Gandalf the Grey discovers that this ring that Frodo has is actually the One Ring of Sauron, it is decided that Frodo must make this epic quest to Mount Doom and the fires of Mordor itself to destroy it. But he cannot do this alone. He is joined by Gandalf the Grey and Legolas the Elf and Gilmy the Dwarf, Aragorn and Boromir of the race of men, and of course his 3 hobbit friends, Merry, Pippin, and Samwise. And through mountains and snow and darkness and forests and deserts and rivers and plains, facing evil and danger at every turn, the Fellowship of the Ring must go. Their quest to destroy the One Ring is the only hope to end the Dark Lord Sauron's reign and save Middle-earth. And there are so many different ways that this story, I believe, intersects our own story, the story that we all find ourselves in. Because like Frodo and like the Fellowship, we are engaged in a great conflict. We are engaged in a great conflict. Maybe at times you have sensed this, haven't you? It's as though we live in a world where anything that's good and true and right and beautiful is hard fought for. It has to be contended for relentlessly, endlessly. We are engaged in a great conflict, but we draw the battle lines in all the wrong places. The battle lines are never where we think we are. In fact, there's a person you may have heard of before. His name is Paul, sometimes known as the Apostle Paul or St. Paul. He was one of the first followers of Jesus. He actually did not start out as a follower of Jesus, though. He actually started out as an anti-Christian, a Christian hater, a Christian hunter. And then he became convinced that this Jesus, was actually the Messiah of God, that he, not Caesar, was the rightful king and Lord of the whole earth. And he began to travel around the Roman Empire telling anyone who would listen to him how he had come to that conclusion and why he knew that without question to be true. And he would start these Jesus-following communities everywhere he went, and then when he would move on, he would write letters back to them. And in one of the letters that he wrote to Christians in the Greek city of Ephesus, he writes this: "For our true struggle is not against enemies of flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And Paul is saying we are engaged in a great struggle, a great conflict, but we are forever drawing the battle lines in the wrong places. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. But don't you think it is? Sometimes, probably a few times this week, I bet. I certainly have. Doesn't it feel like it? That's like those people, that person, your teenager, your mom, your coworker, your ex, your spouse, the unwoke, the woke, the unvaccinated, the vaccinated, the Democrats, the Republicans, whoever they are. I mean, come on. We have battle lines everywhere we look. And aren't they the problem? Don't you feel that sometimes? Aren't they the enemy? Aren't they where your conflict feels like it lies? Make no mistake about it, Paul says. You are engaged in a great conflict, but it is not the war that you think it is. These tiny battles that we pick are mere shadows of the real thing, distractions, if you will. We aren't even scratching the surface of what is really going on. For our struggle, he says, is against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world, spiritual forces of evil in the spiritual or heavenly realms. There is way more to this conflict than meets the eye. There is a terrible evil present in our world, a terrible evil present in our world. And seriously, how could we miss this? Think about it. Poverty, famine, genocide, broken families, injustice, war, politics, slavery, oppression, disease, disasters upon end. There is a terrible evil that is present in our story, though most of us live as if there were not, which makes life at times very confusing. Why is all of this happening? I don't understand. Have you found yourself at times wondering, just thinking to yourself, maybe even out loud, why is it so hard? Why does it have to be so hard? It's like you've been fighting for this marriage. You've been going to counseling and small groups, and you've talked with friends, and you've tried prayer and church and everything you can think of, but it just seems like this ending uphill battle, like you're pushing this boulder up a mountain, and it's exhausting, and you're tired, and it feels hopeless. Why is it so hard? And then people say really silly things like, it shouldn't be that hard. Really? In a world without a terrible evil, maybe that would be true. Why is it so hard, people say? Or something lit you on fire, some time ago, and you began to tap into a sense of a calling, like a dream. There was a passion, something you needed to do, and you took risks, and maybe there were relational risks and financial risks and risks of vocation and time, and you started something. You started doing something, and for some reason, you expected the universe to turn around, see you with a wink and a smile and say, welcome, we're glad you showed up. But it didn't turn out that way. And you lost money, and everything was hard. It seemed to go wrong. Finances fell through. Friends questioned your motives. And at every advance, like every inch of what you feel like you should be doing is hard fought for ground. Why? Why is it so hard? Why is it always so hard? Or you're trying to raise this teenager or maybe this toddler, which is really kind of the same thing when you think about it. No offense to the toddlers. And every guideline you set and every consequence and every boundary you try to enforce just backfires on you. Every conversation ends with a tantrum and a slam door, which again are kind of the same thing. And it's like, why is it so hard? Why does it have to be? Or maybe like me, you lift your head from your own struggles every once in a while, from time to time, long enough to notice that hard for us hardly even compares with hard for much of the world. And sometimes just watching the news, something in me just breaks and grieves, and it's depressing. Or I'm reading social media feeds, or I'm looking at just the division and the hatred and the venom and the vitriol and the finger pointing and the absence of listening and empathy and goodness and nuance from pretty much any discussion. And like Frodo, who wears the ring every once in a while, and it just the darkness cuts through him. I can feel that at times. Like it's bringing something out in me, and it's depressing and it's ugly. Why is that? Why is it so hard? We are engaged in a great conflict. There is a terrible evil that is present in our story. Imagine that you wake up to find yourself in a great and terrible war. The fate of humankind is at stake. There is a darkness, an evil that threatens to imprison, to enslave all of humankind, and your king and your greatest friend calls you forth to awaken, to come fully alive, to step into gifts and strengths and nobility and glory that you did not even realize that you had. And you in that moment are given a quest, a mission that will take you deep into the heart of darkness, that will take you through the gates of hell itself to rescue people who do not even know they need to be rescued. Of course you will be opposed. Of course it will be hard. You will face many dangers. You will be hunted. Would you do that alone? Would you try that alone? Though Frodo is a very brave and willing hobbit, he doesn't stand a chance. Without Sam and Merry and Pippin and Gandalf and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and Boromir, he has no ideas the dangers that lie ahead. The dark minds of Moria and the demon Balrog that awaits them there. The 9 riders who constantly hunt them. The evil orcs called the Uruk-hai who hunt them down as well. The wasteland of Immanmuel. And then there's the ring itself that he carries and the evil within it that seems to destroy things around him and turn people even who are closest to him. Frodo cannot do this alone, and he isn't supposed to. The fellowship must go with him, and the same is true of us. There is a great conflict, a terrible evil present in our story, and your king calls you forth. And as you say yes to that, as we contend against this evil in every form and in every place, including in ourselves, and that might be the most hidden and darkest of them all, as we contend for others, as we contend for our relationships, and as we contend for our very own souls and our lives and the people that we were created to be, when we contend against this evil, we truly are, I believe, discovering our destiny, like what we were made here, why we are here. And isn't that the question that so many ask? Why am I here? Your king calls you forth to step into this destiny, but he does not call you to do this alone. Doesn't want you to do it alone, doesn't intend for you to do it alone. And get this, not just because you can't do it alone, and you can't, but because alone is actually part of the evil, part of the lie, part of the problem that absolutely must be destroyed. The isolation, the individualism, the autonomy of Western civilization, including especially more than ever before, the individualism and isolationism and autonomy of Christianity, or what we call it, is one of the greatest lies and one of the greatest evils in our world. It must be destroyed, and can only be destroyed by its opposite, community, a fellowship. Now, this was clearly understood at the beginning of the Jesus movement, that they were to do this together. It was always together. They were to do this together, not just because together would make them more efficient, but because together, and especially the way that they were supposed to be together, was actually part of the cure to the disease that ailed all of humanity, including themselves. Another of the first followers of Jesus, named Luke, who, by the way, like Paul, did not start out as a Jesus follower. He was a Greek. He was highly educated. He was a doctor. He was a historian. He became a companion of Paul and part of the community, the first followers of Jesus. He knew Peter. He knew John. He knew Mary. He knew James, the brother of Jesus, the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He knew them all, got their stories from them all firsthand. And he, over time, eventually wrote a biography of Jesus' life that carries his name, Luke, and then a history of the beginnings of the Jesus movement that we call the Acts of the Apostles, or sometimes the book of Acts. And here's how he describes the way that the Jesus movement, that Christianity, this thing we call Christianity, actually began. It's found in Acts chapter 2, and here's what he says. They, talking about these first followers of Jesus, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, or literally the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. They devoted themselves first to teaching, to learning the way of Jesus from those who had learned it from Jesus himself. And the apostles did what we all must do. We must pass on what we ourselves have received, the way of life that they had been mentored in, and they're doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. And they devoted themselves to that journey and that process, and they devoted themselves to the fellowship. And fellowship here is the word we translate into English fellowship is the Greek word koinonia. Let me hear you say koinonia with me. 1, 2, 3. Koinonia, perfect, koinonia, which could be translated maybe community. I think partnership is a fantastic translation, even shared life. And this word fellowship in church world today, Christians kind of use this word to refer to good connection, like we really connected, like a good conversation over punching cookies at the potluck. Like, man, that was good fellowship. Like we were just really connecting. We had a great conversation. That was good fellowship. But this is not punching cookies fellowship. This is fellowship of the ring fellowship, this disparate band that surrounds Frodo, that takes an oath to defend them with their lives, if by my life or my death I can assist you in this journey, this quest to destroy that ring in the fire of Mount Doom. We are in this together, they say. I've got your back. You can count on me. They didn't even like each other. It wasn't like, man, we were really clicking there just a minute ago. Hey, let's hang out some more. This was not, hey, we really like each other. There was deep-seated distrust. There were centuries-old animosities between some of these people groups. This wasn't, hey, I'll hang out as long as we get along, as long as it is suiting me, as long as I'm getting fed. It was, we have your back. There is nothing convenient, and there may never be anything fun about it, but you can count on me. We're in this together. They devoted themselves to that. And he says, and to the breaking of bread, which refers probably to eating, but maybe also to what we would call the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper or communion. Sometimes we call that around here. I think very probably it refers to both. Having meals together, and as part of those meals, celebrating or remembering Jesus' own death, which we know the first followers of Jesus did constantly in their meals, which they called love feasts, just taking time during that meal to break bread, to tell the story again, to drink the cup, and to remember and celebrate and give gratitude to Jesus for what he had done. They devoted themselves to the meals, which probably includes that celebration as well, and to prayer, or literally the prayers, referring to regular times of prayer, and they devoted themselves. Think about that word. They were committed to this, committing themselves to gathering together, to learn, to care for, to support, to worship, to pray, to include and welcome others, devoted themselves to this. Why? Why that word? And the answer, I think, is because committing to be together for a group of people, for them, especially people who aren't like you, which is pretty much everybody if you haven't figured it out, people who can be difficult, which can be everybody, committing yourself to be together with and for a group of people like that without end, that's not natural. It's not comfortable. It's not convenient. They devoted themselves to this. And then Luke goes on to say, everyone was filled with awe. Everyone referring to insiders and outsiders alike. People within the community, people who are looking from the outside in. There's this sense of like, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing what's going on there. Possibly in part because wonders and signs were being performed by the apostles, because there was a spiritual power that characterized that community. Wonder and signs is a reference to something the prophet Joel says. Luke is kind of pulling this out and bringing this into this context, that God would one day pour out his Spirit like a river, and his people would live in the flow of that Spirit, and there would be a power to their lives as they brought healing and goodness and light to the darkness and brokenness all around them. And people all around are going, that's happening. That's happening. The words of the prophet Joel, wow. They were filled with awe, but what may have just been just as awe-inspiring is actually what Luke says next. People actually changed their relationship with and the way they viewed their stuff and people and possessions and value. And Luke goes on to say all of the believers were together. And that phrase that we translate together, it could mean just in the same room, but I don't think that's what he means. They weren't always in the same room. It could also mean like on the same page. They were just together. They were on the same page. They were on mission together, and they had everything in common. They were together on the same page, which, by the way, is difficult to do when people are so different from one another. They fought for this. They had to. They were devoted to it. And then they began to do something really extraordinary. They began to sell property and possessions and lands and homes that some of the wealthiest in their community owned. They began to sell certain things in order to give more to everybody who had need. Why in the world would anybody ever do that? Why in the world would somebody with more give it away or sell it so that they could give the proceeds away to somebody who had less when they don't owe that person anything? Why would people do this? And the answer is because that right there is the Jesus way. It's the Jesus way. Jesus had taught them, hey, I want you to love people around you like you love yourself. You're like, hey, I would use this to take care of myself and to take care of my kids, but myself and my kids are actually taken care of, and I still have more. I'm going to use more to take care, to help other people out. And Jesus said, when you love people the way I've loved you, the way you experienced love from me, when you begin to do that for the people around you, others will look at you and they'll connect the dots and they'll go, hey, that looks like Jesus. That looks like something Jesus would do. You must belong to him. And they believed Jesus, and they actually did it. Can you believe that? They sold things that they owned, and they gave proceeds to anybody who had need. And then every day they would meet together, continue to be together. First in the temple courts, there was an everyday rhythm, a habit to this devotion that they had, where they would gather in larger groups in the temple courts, which was massive, the temple in Jerusalem. And the apostles would teach, and they would discuss the teachings of Jesus there, and they would worship and sing songs, and there would be the prayers and so forth. And then they would regroup in homes, in more intimate settings, where they would break bread, there's that phrase again, in their homes and eat together with glad and sincere hearts, and the discussions would continue. And Luke's like, that was like an everyday thing, which, like, okay, does he really literally mean like 365, like this never, ever stop, no breaks? The phrase he uses here could easily be translated like a day-by-day type of deal. His point is quite direct, though. This was regular and frequent. This wasn't biannually. When I got around to it, and I was a little busy for a few months. This was regular. It was frequent because it is difficult, yea, nigh to impossible to be together on mission, on contribution, together in life, together for one another, together in this kind of fellowship, but never actually really be together. That's pretty impossible. And so they were physically and mentally and spiritually together. He goes on saying, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. I love that phrase, enjoying the favor. It's like people looked at them, kind of from the outside in, you know. People looked at them and this way of life they shared and the way they were for one another and fought for one another and sacrificed for one another. And people looked at the way they did life at that kind of community. And they may not have believed what they believed. It's like these guys, they believe some really weird stuff about a crucified Messiah who did not militarily defeat the Roman Empire but did something else. And he's now the king of the world. And I don't know if I believe what they believe, but man, would you look at them. I would love, I don't believe what they believe, but I would love my daughter to marry one of their sons. I mean, they're just so amazing the way they treat one another. And they enjoyed the favor of all. There was something magnetic and attractive, not about their message, by the way, not about their preaching, but about their way, their fellowship, their community. In fact, their community was part of the message, was part of what God was doing in the world. And as a result, their numbers just grew and grew and grew, and the Lord added to their number daily, every day, people who were being saved. They were welcoming, they were inclusive, and everybody belonged. And that community, that fellowship, that group, that took off. It was the epicenter of a movement, like a brick thrown into the middle of a pond, and the Jesus movement just took off. Now, here's an interesting note to me. Luke is actually writing decades later. He's writing decades later telling this story, telling the story of the first Jesus community. And the way he tells some of these early stories, it's so clear, it feels so clear to me that what he's doing is he's establishing like the DNA to the movement. And people who belong to house churches now spread all over the ancient world are reading this document. And it's like, as it spreads, he's giving them the DNA so that it would stay true. Kind of like Ray Kroc, simplifying and clarifying the genetic code of what McDonald's would be like so that as it multiplied, it would keep its essence, it would look the same. And years later, there are communities that are reading Luke's document of the history of the beginnings of their movement. And they're reading this document and they're going, yeah, that's us. I mean, the details are a little different. I mean, things are a little different, but that's what it's like to be a part of this. And the movement took off to Damascus and then to Antioch. Oh man, Antioch. Antioch was the site of the first citywide Jesus movement, and it really began to shape and change Christianity. Paul would later become a part of that. Peter would, Barnabas would. And then to south and to the east to Petra, to the west to Alexandria. Then it spread up north to modern-day Turkey, cities like Ephesus and Troas, and then into Greece and Philippi and Thessalonica and Corinth, and finally to Rome and to Spain and Carthage. I mean, to the ends of the earth, this missional movement, bringing the way of Jesus, not just the message of Jesus, the way of Jesus to the corners of the earth, bringing grace and hope and love and redemption and goodness and light and glory and dignity through the way that they lived to combat the dark spread of evil and oppression and injustice that saturated this earth, and to set prisoners free who didn't even know they needed to be set free. And as it spread, these missional communities just sprouted up everywhere. Disparate people, very different, very opposite types of people from one another folded into these communities where they learned to love and care for and support and pray for one another like family. Fellowships. And they called these communities Ecclesias. Ecclesia. Now, Ecclesia is a Greek word that occurs very frequently in the documents that we call the New Testament in the Bible. It literally means ecclesia, to be called out, But in their language, that word just referred to a group of people who were called or assembled together for a reason, for a certain kind of purpose. So, for example, citizens from a particular city, when they were called together, called out to a meeting to discuss and debate matters relevant to the city, that meeting, that gathering, that assembly would be called a ecclesia. Soldiers who were mustered out, assembled together for military service, a platoon was called an ecclesia. And they began to call themselves, I love this, the Ecclesias of God. We are the ecclesia of God, that God had called them out and had called them together for a reason. And we translate that word ecclesia in our Bibles, we translate it with the English word church. That's what church is, what it's supposed to be. People who are gathered, who are for one another on purpose. A missional, redemptive community. And for hundreds of years, those missional communities, those churches, those ecclesias just expanded and grew, subverting the status quo. This was crazy. They treated powerless people like slaves and homeless folks and women and children and foreigners. People who were powerless in society, they treated them as powerful. They actually treated them as equals, all of them as equals. They absolutely flipped the social ladder of the ancient world. They loved hurt and broken people of the world. They cared for them and spent their lives to bring them up. They stood for moral integrity in their marriage and in business when such things did not exist. And the movement grew. It grew and it grew and grew, even though marginalized and totally misunderstood. And as it grew, the epicenter, the hub of that movement was always the gathering. The weekly gathering. And they would gather together on something, go ahead now for it, that they called the Lord's Day. Anyone want to take a guess what day of the week the Lord's Day is? It is Sunday, exactly. Now here's what's interesting. Initially, God's people, the people of Israel, worshiped on Saturday, the seventh day, Shabbat or Sabbath. And then as a matter of historical record, after the first Easter, they switched to Sunday, the first day of the week. Why? Because that's the day that Jesus rose from the dead, and they called that day the Lord's Day. That's the Lord's Day. That's his day. And every Sunday, the Lord's Day, which by the way was a work day, they did not have weekends. They did not get the day off. Christians would gather often before dawn because they had to go to work at dawn, or sometimes after work at the end of the day. Every day, every Lord's Day, they would gather together to do three things. They would worship God, they would sing songs, and the words of which would remind them and center them and keep them focused as we do. Then they would learn together. They had collections of documents that were passing around between churches, collections sometimes of some of the letters, maybe by Paul or Peter or John, some of these letters, and then maybe one or two of maybe the stories of Jesus' life or records of some of the words of Jesus from one of the apostles, and they would break these out. Often they were in hiding because they were illegal to have, and they would read them together, and they would discuss what they meant to their own lives, and then they would care for each other. As part of their gatherings became the genesis of how needs were met in their community, and not just within their own fellowship, but within their towns and cities for people who were actually not a part of their group and maybe even opposed to them. It was the epicenter for mission, for the way that they loved and cared, and the way that they did that. The way that they gathered, and the way that they loved, and the way that they cared, again, broke down all of the strict social barriers of the Greco-Roman world, which was pretty close to the caste system in India in the past few centuries. Just broke those boundaries down between races and ethnicities that held centuries-long animosities and distrust towards one another, between classes of people, the haves and the have-nots, the very elite and the wealthy, and the day laborers and the poor and the slaves, serving each other, wealthy, elite people, washing a slave's feet and bringing the meal to a day laborer, serving one another, loving one another, caring, eating together at the same time, unheard of. It was disruptive. It was confusing. It was attractive. It was appealing. And they gathered every week, often at great cost to themselves, even when they were being arrested and executed for doing so. They gathered every week, even though they did not have the day off, and they still had to work, and they were tired, and they gathered often before dawn at the very end of the day, even though they did not have a children's ministry, or a band, or a building, or air conditioning. They gathered, and they gathered every week. They were devoted to it. Why would they do that? Why that particular habit? It did not exist anywhere else in the ancient world. Why that kind of devotion? And the answer is because that rhythm, that fellowship is what kept their mission and their lives on point, and they knew that. And so one of them put it this way in a letter that was written later, that we call the letter to the Hebrews, written probably around the time that Luke's stories of Jesus' life were being written. And the context of this letter is that there are some people who are starting to drift now. Things have gotten very hard for followers of Jesus, and they're no longer meeting together with the ecclesia, with the gathering. They're no longer part of the fellowship because it's just easier to pull back and to maybe drift a little bit. And in the middle of this letter, the writer to the Hebrews says this. He says, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, because life has a way of beating hope out of you, does it not? You're weak, the pressures you face, the conflicts with your parents, just have the regrets and the fear and the guilt, and sometimes just the gravitational pull of life and of our own lives just drags us down and drags us away, and shame and depression and darkness just has a way of isolating us and pushing us away from others. And we need a regular reminder that God is not finished with us yet, and he's not finished with the person sitting next to you either. He is faithful, and we hold on to hope by holding on to each other. Let us hold on to this hope together. And then he says, and let us consider, I love this phrase, how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Like, put some thought into this. Like, think about this for a while. How can you help keep other people's fires lit? How can you help spur others around you towards love and good deeds so that you keep on loving and you keep on doing good? Not, he says, not giving up meeting together or gathering together. Why would you ever do that? Are you kidding me? As some are in the habit of doing. Yes, it's difficult. And yes, you're facing all of these kinds of pressures. But listen, he was like, listen. What we're doing and why we're together here in this world is what God is doing. Do not give up on that, but rather encouraging one another all the more as you see the day approaching, to hold on to hope, to love more, and to do more good. Stay the course, he's saying. And what he's saying, and why Christians gathered weekly, even when it was inconvenient and incredibly difficult, is that gathering regularly is the fuel that keeps our collective spiritual fires burning hot. That gathering together regularly is the fuel that keeps our collective spiritual fires burning hot. Gathering together to learn and to grow and to worship. And as Lyle said earlier, to sing those songs and put our own words to them and care and to give and to serve and to invite and to include, breaking down barriers, loving people who are not really like us, transforming the whole nature of tribes and boundaries of who's in and out, just breaking that stuff down, always inviting, always including, always welcoming, discovering whole new ways for generosity and compassion and humility and service. Gathering regularly is the fuel that keeps our spiritual fires burning hot. There's an old preacher story of a pastor who was missing an old friend. The man had stopped showing up to the gatherings, and the pastor was like, is he drifting? Is he doing okay? Is he busy? Is he upset with me? Which is one of the things pastors wonder when people stop showing up. Like, did I do something? Did something happen? And so he decided to visit the man at his home. It's winter. There's a fire burning in the fireplace. And the two men sit together watching the fire very quietly for a while as it cracks and crickling, in the fireplace. And finally the pastor got up and he walked over to the fire and he took some tongs and he pulled one of the red-hot glowing embers out of the fireplace and he set it to the side by itself on the hearth. Now, you know what happens to a red-hot coal when it gets set by itself away from the fire? You know what happens to it? Well, it cools off, right? And that's because embers, coals, depend on each other. It's a shared heat. They depend on each other to stay hot. And so the piece of wood, of course, as you can just picture it, cools and turns black. And then after it had done so, the pastor stood back up, walked back over, took that ember and put it back into the fire. Quickly, it just sparks up again. And it's burning red hot once more. And then he smiled to his friend and bid him good day and left. And according to the story, the man was back in their gatherings the next weekend. Now, that's just an old preacher story. That's kind of stuff. That doesn't actually happen. And here's what we all know. We all know that it is possible to show up here and stay just as dead and cold as you were before you got here. But the point of the writer of Hebrews is making, the point that he's making is that our heat is a shared heat. It's a shared heat, our passion for God, our hope, our sense of purpose, our sense of mission and what matters together, our desire to make his love famous in the world, to tear down barriers, to invade the darkness with light, to gather people who do not know they need to be set free and set them free, is fueled and fired up by being together with people who share that very same passion. There is no such thing as a Lone Ranger Christian. To which you might think, and people have asked me before, hold on. So John, don't you think it's possible to be a Christian and never go to church? To which I might say, maybe. And it's also possible to be married and never go home. But you would not call that much of a marriage. You would probably have to redefine the word and what it means. And there's certainly no fire there. Gathering regularly is the fuel that keeps our collective spiritual fires burning hot, that spurs us on, as the writer of Hebrews says, spurs our character, our hope, our generosity, our love, our mission, our good deeds on. And by the way, that's not just my opinion, which you would expect would be my opinion. It turns out to be verifiable fact. Check this out. There have been dozens of studies over the last couple of decades that trace the impact of daily life, everyday life, on those who gather regularly in a community of faith. And here's what turns out to be true. This is just substantiated by many studies. If you attend religious gatherings weekly, and the reason why it's worded like that is the questions on these surveys aren't, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you call yourself a Christian? There may or may not be any difference between people who answer yes to that and anyone else in the world. But when they answer yes to that question, yes, I gather weekly, here's what is true of you. You are 30% more likely to have donated to a charity this week. And not just a Christian charity. You are 30% more likely to have helped a stranger in need this week. You are twice as likely to have let somebody ahead of you in the grocery store. You are twice as likely to have donated blood. We're going to have a blood drive coming up pretty soon, so keep that in mind. You're twice as likely to have volunteered time for charity. And again, not just church charity, pretty much every charity, but it doesn't just stop there with matters of generosity and compassion and kindness. Check this out. If you gather weekly in a community of faith, you are half as likely to get a divorce. You are way more likely to say you are happy in your marriage. You're more likely to have read a book. You're more likely to support the arts. You're more likely to wear a seatbelt. You're more likely to use a trash bin rather than littering, and you will outlive your non-attending friends by 7.5 years, and you will be happier in those years. And you're like, well, wait a minute, like, hold on. I don't need an ecclesia for all of those things. I mean, seriously, I can be just as generous without gathering regularly. You don't need church to do great things to care for people in need. I can do that on my own, come up with creative ways to care for those in need. I don't need Terra Nova or some kind of church to keep my marriage and my family happy, to combat evil in this world, and I certainly don't need church to not litter anymore. I can do all of that on my own. To which I would say, well, of course you can. Of course you can. It just turns out it's a whole lot less likely that you actually will. And on top of that, there is so much more good that we do when we actually do it together, when we pool our resources and we do it together. In fact, in just a couple of weeks, you'll be the first to know, we're going to do this campaign. We haven't done anything like this in a while, called How to Be Rich. Because here's the thing, everybody wants to get rich, wants to know how to get rich. But what if it turns out you already are? What do you do with that? Because it's one thing to be rich, and it's another thing to be good at it. And this next series is going to be an extravagant outpouring of generosity and compassion. I just want to say, get ready, because it's coming in a couple of weeks. But here's what the first followers of Jesus knew to their toes. We are engaged in a great conflict. There is a terrible evil that is present in our world. Our King has called us forth. And as we contend against that evil, it's like we are discovering our destiny. We're becoming who we were meant to be, as Gandalf says to Frodo at one point in the movie. And Frodo's like, I wish this had never happened in my time. I wish the ring had never come to me. And Gandalf says to him, so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And this is our time. This right now. It's our time. It's the only time we will be given. And it is messy. It is far from ideal. There is a pandemic. It doesn't seem to be going away. People are isolated. They're afraid. They're angry with each other. It's a messy, messy time. But friends, this is our time. This is ours, and we have to decide what our generation, is going to do with the time that was given us. What will we do with it? Are we going to rise up? Are we going to take sides with the kingdom of light? Are we going to invade the kingdom of darkness and charge the gates of hell to rescue people who don't even know they need to be rescued? Are we going to carry the Jesus movement into the world in our generation and into the next generation? Our King has called us out, but he has not called us to do it alone. We need a fellowship. We need a partnership. We need a redemptive missional community that says yes together to the way of Jesus. And my hope and my dream and my prayer for this ecclesia is that in this new day, in this next day, we would be those people who say yes to that. Let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you have not given up on us, and you have not given up on this fallen, broken, dark world. We recognize there is a terrible evil present. Sometimes it confuses us. We often live as if it's not there. But I pray for us as a community, this group we call Terra Nova, and I pray for myself, that as you call us out to wake up, to come fully alive, to step into gifts and strengths and glory and mission that we did not even realize we had, that we would just say yes to you. And we wouldn't say yes to you alone. We would say yes to you together. And we would look around and say, I've got your back. You can count on me. We want to charge the gates of hell because you said they would not prevail against us. And we want to follow your spirit as you lead us into this dark world. And we want to bring your light everywhere we go. We say yes to you. And we say that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for joining us for part 4 or week 4 of our series. Before you leave, before you check out, and before you take off, I would love to just re-mention that Connect card to you. If you tore that out and started filling it out, like what you've been doing over the summer, don't forget Lyle mentioned Terra Nova Tours, which is next week. Really excited about it. And man, talk about a next step for stepping into Ecclesia, into community. So write Tour Me on that Connect card. You can also write Serve Day for the Abbey. Don't forget that we're doing that together. Thank you again for your generosity, because check this out. Generosity changes the world. This is our way of life. And then I want to invite you back next week. The series is wrapping up with one more classic, and I want to invite you to invite somebody back with you next week, because we're going to talk about this here movie happening there. Forrest Gump next week. Series ends, Classics Edition. Bring somebody back with you. We'll see you next week. God bless you guys. Have an amazing week being God's ecclesia together. We'll see you next weekend.